तो ये कैट का अपने पास पैसेज है और क्वेश्चंस भी है उसके, तो इसको सॉल्व करेंगे। तो सबसे पहले आपको क्वेश्चन लिख लेते हैं। द सेंट्रल आर्ग्यूमेंट ऑफ द पैसेज, what does the author imply about the financial instruments like bookkeeping and insurance? What is the tone of the passage? Which of the following, if true, would most weaken the arguments present in the final paragraph? Which of the following can be inferred about the author's view on the nature of colonial trade? Which of the following is most likely the author's perspective on the role of financial tools like marine insurance and bookkeeping? पैराग्राफ तो छोटे हैं, तो पहला पैराग्राफ पढ़ें। द राइज ऑफ यूरोपियन colonial empires in the early modern period was not merely a story of military conquest and territorial acquisition. It was equally a tale of commerce, credit, and commodities. तो मतलब ये है कि जो यूरोपियन कॉलोनियल एम्पायर्स की जो राइज है अर्ली मॉडर्न पीरियड में, वो सिर्फ मिलिट्री कॉन्क्वेस्ट और टेरिटोरियल एक्विजिशन के बारे में नहीं था, वो कॉमर्स, क्रेडिट और कमोडिटीज़ की भी एक टेल थी। फ्रॉम द पेपर मार्केट्स ऑफ कैलिकट to the sugarcane plantations of Caribbean, the early modern world was intricately woven together by economic threads that underpinned the imperial expansion. The East India Company, the East India Companies, whether Dutch or English, were not simply mercantile ventures, but proto-corporate entities that wielded quasi-sovereign powers capable of waging war, negotiating treaties, and administering justice. What is often overlooked, however, is the degree to which success of these ventures hinged not just on the abundance of natural resources or on the weakness of indigenous politics, but on the infrastructures of trust and risk that enabled across vast distances. Bills of exchange, marine insurance, double entry bookkeeping, these seemingly dry instruments formed the backbone of an expanding global economy. पहला पैराग्राफ समझ में आ गया कि from the pepper markets of Calicut to sugar plantations of the Caribbean, the early modern world was being intricately woven together by economic threads that underpinned imperial expansion. Okay, the East India Company, whether Dutch or English, were not simply mercantile ventures, but proto-corporate entities that wielded quasi-sovereign powers capable of waging war, negotiating treaties, and administering justice. What is often overlooked, however, is the degree to which the success of these ventures hinged not just on the abundance of natural resources or on the weakness of indigenous polities, but on the infrastructure of trust and risk that enabled trade across vast distances. So, bills of exchange, money, insurance, double entry bookkeeping, these seemingly the instruments form the backbone of an expanding global economy. The empire, in other words, floated as much on ledgers as on gunboats. As in many cases, financial instruments traveled faster than goods. They represented shipping, perception, expectation long before cargo reached its ports. Moreover, colonial economies were not blank states waiting to be written upon by the European capital. Local merchants, middlemen, and brokers played indispensable in manipulating good foreign trade. For example, European trade often relied on Indian money as to convert bullion into goods, interpret local credit system, and manage the nuances of regional trade networks rather than imposing a one-way economic order. Early colonial commerce was often a complex negotiation between differing modes of exchange, rationalities of value, and temporalities of credit. From benign the consolidation of colonial capital eventually required the erosion of the Indian system between Bengal. The company increasingly undermined the local credit network revenue and accepted Indian system more amenable to extraction had over time nationalized its own institution as universal, obscuring the historical violence and epistemic representation of the world then was not just a community, it was record he ordered. Central argument क्या है पैसेज का? The success of colonial expansion was primarily rooted in European financial and was about brute military or terror. like ये तो नहीं है colonial इसको काट दो ऑप्शन को। colonial commerce involved both European financial instruments harmonious and European involved to combination of trade, military power, and to local system and a global capitalism and economy for both the। देखो आक yet this entanglement was far from benign, which required the erosion or absorption of indigenous systems. Institution property scoring the historical value। ये भी नहीं है। colonial मेरे ख्याल से सी ऑप्शन इसका सही होना चाहिए आंसर। सेकंड क्वेश्चन देखते हैं, व्हाट इज द ऑथर इम्प्लाई अबाउट फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशन लाइक बुक कीपिंग एंड इंश्योरेंस। Bills of exchange, marine insurance, double entry bookkeeping, these seem dry instruments form the backbone of। देखो when what is often overlooked however is the degree to which the success of these ventures hinge not just on the abundance of natural resources on the weakness of indigenous polities but on the infrastructure of trust and risk they are able to trade across far distances. Bills of exchange, money insurance, double entry bookkeeping, these seem dry instruments form the backbone of expanding global economy. The empire ledgers as on gunboats, as in many cases the financial travel faster than goods they represented, shaping perception and expectation long before the cargo। These tools of देखो often overlooked है however is the degree to however is what is often overlooked however is the degree to which the success of these ventures hinged not only on the abundance of natural resources or on the weakness of infrastructure of trust and development as military conquest and getting between but on the infrastructure trade देखो मैं फर्स्ट सी को तो अटेम्प्ट कर रहा हूँ, अटेम्प्ट, पर कुछ एक चीज़ है इसको मैं अटेम्प्ट ही नहीं कर रहा। जैसे क्वेश्चन टू है, अगर क्वेश्चन टू में मेरे को करना होगा तो मैं ए ऑप्शन को, चलो मैं अटेम्प्ट कर लेता हूँ ए ऑप्शन को, इससे ठीक रहेगा। चलो, व्हाट इज द टोन ऑफ द पैसेज? Analytical and historically reflective is subtle of colonial narrative, celebrity of system that raised uh, न्यूट्रन इसमें सेलिब्रिटी तो नहीं है, क्रिटिकल एंड डिसमिसिव एंड, हाँ हिस्टोरिकल ये कह सकते हैं, बी वाला ऑप्शन से मैं मार्क करूँगा इसको, थ्री का बी। Which of the following, if true, would most weaken the arguments present in the final paragraph? The final paragraph क्या है? Yes, this entanglement was far from benign. The consolidation of colonial capitalism eventually required the erosion and absorption of indigenous system. As British influence expanded in Bengal, the company increasingly undermined local credit networks and revenue arrangements, substituting them with systems more amenable to extraction and control. Over time, colonialism naturalized its own institutions, property, contract, wage as universal, obscuring the historical violence and epistemic ruptures that finally accompanied their imposition. The colonial world then was not just economically integrated, it was epistemically reordered. So yet, the entanglement was far from benign. The consolidation of colonial capitalism eventually required the erosion or absorption of indigenous system. जो कंसोलिडेशन है colonial capitalism का, eventually required the erosion or absorption of indigenous system ना. As British influence emerged in Bengal, the company increasingly undermined local credit networks and revenue arrangements, substituting them in systems more amenable to extraction and control. Over time, colonial nationalized its own institutions, property, contract, wage as universal, obscuring the historical violence and epistemic rupture accompanying the employees. The colonial was not just was epistemically reordered. The Mughal era land tenure system persisted in 2010 से Huh? What is the tone of the paragraph? नहीं, what making the हाँ, indigenous merchant Bengal voluntary approved British constitution due to the which of the following if true would not begin merchant Bengal adopted British constitution. Colonial administration in India consistently relied on local elites to implement rules. Colonial administrators in India consistently relied on local elites to implement revenue collection system. इसमें से वीकेंड कैसे करेगा? आर्ग्यूमेंट्स प्रेजेंट इन द फाइल पे, तो देखो आर्ग्यूमेंट क्या है कि जो कंसोलिडेशन है colonial capitalism का eventually required the erosion of the indigenous system had British influence expand Bengal, he undermined local credit networks and revenue arrangements, substituting them with system more amenable to extraction. Over time, colonialism naturalized its own institution, property, contract, wage. As you ask, the historical violence and epistemic rupture, economy indicators. Mughal era annual revenue system persisted when the European traders were often at the mercy of monsoon patterns that disrupted maritime trade. Colonial administration consistently relied on implement revenue collection system. Indigenous merchants in Bengal voluntarily adopted. मैं इसमें बी ऑप्शन चुनूंगा, लेकिन मैं इसको मार्क नहीं कर रहा, मैं इसे वैसे ही करने के लिए गैस कर रहा हूँ, पर मैं इसको मार्क नहीं करूँगा, इस क्वेश्चन को मैं अटैम्प्ट ही नहीं करूँगा, क्योंकि मैंने अपने पैसेज का एक्यूरेसी देखी है, कम है, बहुत ज़्यादा कम है. Which of the following can be inferred of the author view on the nature of early colonial trade? अर्ली colonial trade के बारे में. It followed the same logic across all respective of It was your habitual mission. Very good. ये ऑप्शन मैं फोर्थ वाले में मार्क करूँगा। ठीक है, तो ये हटा दो। ये फिफ्थ को तो मैं अटेम्प्ट ही नहीं करूँगा, गेस करूँगा। गेस करूँगा मैं इसमें बी ऑप्शन। इसको मार्क नहीं करूँगा मैं, है ना, इसको मैं अटेम्प्ट नहीं कर रहा। विच ऑफ द फॉलोइंग इज मोस्ट लाइकली ऑटो परस्पेक्टिव ऑन द रोल ऑफ फाइनेंशियल टूल्स लाइक, हाँ। इसका बी ऑप्शन मार्क करूँगा, सिक्स का। अब मैं आपको आंसर्स बता देता हूँ कि अपने सही है कि नहीं और कितने मार्क्स आए। ओके, तो बहुत ही बढ़िया आर सी के मैंने आंसर चेक किए। सिर्फ एक गलत है और चार सही हैं, और जो मैंने वो गेस किया था वो भी सही निकला। तो अपने सारे सही हैं आर सी। तो अपना टोटल स्कोर जो बनता है, अब ये गैस वाले को तो नहीं जोड़ेंगे पर इस वाले को जोड़ेंगे तो 3 4 से 12, 11 स्कोर होता है। तो फैबुलस स्कोर है। और मैंने बहुत अच्छा परफॉर्म किया आरसी में, मेरा इतना नहीं आता है जनरली। गैस वाले भी अगर अपन करते तो अपना स्कोर आराम से हो जाता 14। ओके, तो एक पैसेज में 14 और 18 मिनट्स में ठीक ही है। तो ओके, थैंक यू।